I'm going to set the framework of what I'm going to speak about tonight. We could talk about the company town itself. We'd go on for hours. There's a great book about that written by Robert Armstrong, if you want to read that. I could show you 1,000 slides. There are thousands of them. But the Sugar Land Historical Historic Foundation has all of those, so you can check those there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of the oral histories that I collected when I was doing my thesis and a little afterward, and I'm going to let the people who lived in the company town explain what it was like to live here. We've all heard about company towns. Nothing is good that we've ever heard about a company town, but this is our basic definition. In the Merriam-Webster, the definition comes directly after company store and directly before company union, which seems to be a natural progression of things. There was no national legislation that protected anybody who lived in a company town until the 1930s, so whatever the owners wanted to do, they could do. At the peak in the late 1800s, there were over 2,500 company towns in the United States, and they housed over 3% of the U.S. population, so there were a lot of them around. T.C. Roselle was one of the people that helped. You're going to hear some voices more than others, and T.C.'s voice will come out loud and clear all evening long. T.C. Roselle. There were other company towns, you see, in East Texas, lumber towns that were company. Oil companies had what they used to call camps. Sugar Land was a company town, single industry, raised and refined sugarcane. It was owned entirely by the partnership of Isaac Kempner and William T. Eldridge. And those two men owned everything. It was so much a company town that they even owned the rail line that went in front. So it was everything. Let's look at the two men that owned the partnership. Just quickly, there's a lot that could be said. We could have a lecture on each of them. But let's look at the difference in the partnership. William T. Eldridge was 12 years old. He was born in 1862. He was 12 years old when he finally left home. He was self-made and self-destructive many times. He claimed under oath in court that he never had a lesson inside a schoolhouse in his life, but he was not illiterate, but not very well educated. According to Robert Armstrong, another voice you'll hear a lot tonight, Robert Armstrong, there wasn't anything stupid about him. Eldridge was into big things. He was not a small thinker. He was a marshal in Eagle Lake, Texas. That's when he killed the first 3 men that he killed. He was taken up on charges, first-degree murder. He was acquitted because a local businessman spoke in his behalf, and the local businessman who spoke out for him was William Donovan. Robert Armstrong provided me with some transcripts, some court transcripts of murder trials. And I want to give you the story behind those. According to Robert Armstrong, Otis Enquist found these paper-wrapped packages with both original Eldridge court transcripts under the Ellis house after Eldridge died. Enquist brought them to Armstrong because they'd been roommates at Texas A&M. Robert Armstrong told Imperial President Herbert Kempner about the transcripts and that I wanted to write a book about Eldridge. Herbert took them to his father, Isaac Kempner, who told me that he felt that an Eldridge biography shouldn't be written until Eldridge's son, Randall, passed away. Randall died in 1987. That's the year that Mr. Armstrong wrote his book on the company town. The transcripts were from murder trials in 1902 and 1905. They were for the murder of William Donovan, the man who stood up for Eldridge in court, and for his brother-in-law, John C. Calhoun. I read the transcripts and I asked Mr. Armstrong, who knew Eldridge personally, what his take was on this. He believed that Eldridge personally shot both men because he planned it. He knew that Donovan would be taking a train and he ambushed him, and he likewise threw open a curtain of Calhoun's berth on another train and shot him 4 times. Robert Armstrong. It was the method most consistent with Eldridge's character. By the time Eldridge went for his third murder trial, he was only tried 3 times because 2 of the men he killed were not white, and you were not tried for murdering non-whites in the late 1800s. But by the time he went to trial, he co-owned the property here in Sugar Land with Isaac Kempner. The issue did not go away, however, even though he was acquitted. Robert Armstrong. Eldridge joined my parents in their home to play bridge. Now, this is after 1923. We're talking 20 years later. Eldridge wouldn't sit in a lighted, undraped room after dark because he'd been shot in the back once and he'd killed 5 men. He wasn't sure that the Donovan heirs were through with him. So before he would come in, we'd go around and we'd pull all the shades down, even in the summertime, and there was no air conditioning. This slide is of the gravesite of Donovan and Calhoun, and you'll notice that it's a very angry avenging angel. Okay, let's bounce what we know about Eldridge off from what we know about Mr. Kempner. Isaac Kempner was 11 years younger than Eldridge. He was born in 1873. He had a very privileged childhood. The family home took up 7 city blocks in Galveston. He was well educated. He went to a boarding school in Virginia to prepare to study law at Washington and Lee College. In 1894, about 6 weeks before he was due to graduate, his father died suddenly, and he had to leave school to come home as the oldest son to run the H. Kempner Trust. It was $1.5 million at the end of the 1800s. He managed to lose several $1,000s by some bad investments, and pretty soon he developed a habit of looking for experts in fields before he ever went into that area. In 1905, he began investing heavily in banking, and he met A.A.B. Warhide, who was the trustee for this property, the Cunningham properties that were bankrupt here in Sugar Land. And that's how he met Eldridge. Warhide introduced the 2 men. They became partners in 1905. Kempner recognized Eldridge was a self-made man. He believed that he was well-trained. He had considerable vision. And most of you know that his mother did not agree with him. Isaac Kempner's mother was very concerned that Eldridge would not hesitate to murder her son. Now, we've heard some scathing, some criticism of Eldridge. We kind of know that, But as I went around town and talked to different people and interviewed and just talked at random to people, I could never find a criticism of Isaac Kempner. This is the closest criticism I could find. I loved that old man Kempner, even if he was a Jew. That was it. Everyone just loved him, and I couldn't, I don't know if it was mythical, but they just all really liked him. Employee Luther Brock. Mr. Kempner and Mr. Eldridge were nothing alike. Eldridge was a tightwad, a man-killer. Marjorie Brooks Ashford. I always wondered how they got together because they seemed to be opposite. Mr. Eldridge was, I don't know if rough would describe it, but the Kempners seemed to be more polished society people than Mr. Eldridge was. That was probably an understatement. Robert Armstrong. Eldridge's motive to build the company town? To gain favor with Mr. Kempner, who was a good, kind man. Kempner remained in Galveston, and Eldridge moved to Sugar Land as the resident general manager. In 1908, they had the Ellis Plantation House moved from west of town onto the refinery grounds so that Eldridge could live there. Both men agreed on one thing, that they would not profit from their workers outside the workplace. Robert Armstrong. Eldridge had printed his own money in other towns. Sugar Land was as isolated as those towns. Given his own inclination, he would have had that same kind of town. But Mr. Kempner said, no, I don't want it done that way. Luther Brock. Shopping before the Depression, they had coupon money, book money, good only in Sugar Land. But they'd swap it for 90% of the cash value. They used it for many years. 90% is a very high swap value for company script. The partnership was a 50-50 split of holdings financed by Kempner money. Eldridge also received an annual salary of $5,000 plus a 5% profit share. The partnership allowed Eldridge sole ownership of the Sugar Land Railroad. And there's a lot of theories, but nobody really knows why that was allowed. The Sugar Land Railroad ran parallel to Highway 6, from Sugar Land down toward Arcola. Eldridge borrowed Kempner money on condition to repay it out of his 5% profit share. Of course, nobody knew if we were going to make any profits, did they? Robert Armstrong. Took a lot of nerve to ask Mr. Kempner for stuff, but Eldridge knew what he was doing, the job that Mr. Kempner wanted. Eldridge was careful to do that. As Eldridge began to see his successes, he began to see that Mr. Kempner was impressed. And that's when he began asking for more. That's the kind of guy he was.